The flight begins. In October 1972, a rugby team from Uruguay, along with their friends and family, boarded a plane heading from Montevideo to Santiago, Chile. It was meant to be a routine flight for a sports trip, but little did they know, this journey would become one of the most harrowing survival stories ever told. The plane, a Fairchild FH-227D, took off in high spirits. However, the weather was not favorable, and the flight soon veered off course. A disastrous turn. The flight encountered sudden bad weather, including turbulent winds and snowstorms as they neared the Andes Mountains. The pilots attempted to adjust their course, but they were unfamiliar with the area. Visibility was low, and the mountains rose sharply ahead. The plane was soon off course, heading into the heart of the Andes, where no one could have imagined the catastrophe about to unfold. The crash. As the storm worsened, the pilots could no longer control the aircraft. They crashed into the mountains, and the plane broke into pieces upon impact. The survivors were in immediate shock, many seriously injured, and the wreckage was scattered across a snow-covered slope. The group of 45 passengers found themselves stranded in one of the most remote places on Earth, surrounded by nothing but snow and ice. Initial shock and survival. Survival instincts kicked in, and the survivors started to assess the damage. Some were severely injured, and others were dead. They quickly realized the gravity of their situation. Rescue was not immediate, and the likelihood of being found quickly was slim. The survivors began to organize, rationing what little food they had, such as chocolate and wine. But they knew that the real struggle was just beginning. The cold and isolation. With no communication with the outside world, the survivors faced sub-zero temperatures that quickly threatened their survival. Days turned into nights with temperatures plummeting well below freezing, and snowstorms continued to batter the survivors. They fashioned makeshift shelters from the wreckage, but the cold was unbearable. At this point, they knew that even if they survived, their chances of being rescued in the vast Andes were slim. Desperate measures. Food supplies dwindled, and the survivors began to experience hunger and dehydration. After days of suffering, the group was forced to make an unimaginable decision. They began to eat the bodies of the deceased to stay alive. This act of cannibalism, though horrifying, was their only means of survival. The group struggled with the moral weight of their decision, but their hunger made it an unavoidable reality. Search for help. After several days without any sign of rescue, a group of survivors decided to attempt an escape. Two men, Fernando Parado and Roberto Canessa, volunteered to try to trek out of the mountains to find help. They had no food, little water, and their bodies were exhausted, but they had no choice but to try. They left the wreckage and ventured into the mountains, facing seemingly insurmountable odds. A harrowing journey. Parado and Canessa endured extreme physical challenges as they climbed the steep slopes, battling exhaustion, frostbite, and starvation. They had no clear direction, but they were driven by the hope of finding help. Days of walking in the harshest conditions took a toll on their bodies and their spirits. Yet they pushed forward, motivated by the thought of saving the others back at the wreckage. Finding civilization. After days of relentless trekking, Parado and Canessa finally stumbled upon a small mountain village. Weak and nearly frozen, they found someone who could help. The villagers quickly contacted authorities, and a rescue mission was organized. Parado and Canessa had made it. They had found help, but now the real race against time began. The rescue mission begins. With the information Parado and Canessa provided, rescuers began their mission to find the wreckage site and bring the remaining survivors to safety. Time was running out, and every minute was crucial. The survivors back at the wreckage were running out of supplies and morale. They clung to the hope that help was on the way. The struggle for life. The survivors at the wreckage were losing strength. Days had passed, and they were still stuck in the freezing mountains. Their injuries and the cold had taken a toll on them. Some began to lose hope, but the determination of the group kept them going, even as their physical conditions worsened. The first rescue helicopter. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the first rescue helicopter arrived. The survivors were airlifted one by one from the mountains. The relief was overwhelming as they realized that they had made it out alive. The mission was not over yet, but the first few survivors had made it to safety. The last of the survivors. Over the next several days, more helicopters arrived to rescue the remaining survivors. Despite the extreme conditions and the challenges of the mountain terrain, they were all brought to safety. In total, 16 of the original 45 passengers survived the ordeal. The survivors were physically and emotionally scarred, but they had made it through. The aftermath. The world was stunned by the story of survival. The media covered the incredible tale, and the survivors were hailed as heroes. They shared their story, speaking about their journey, their sacrifices, and the lessons they learned about survival, resilience, and the human spirit. After 72 days in the harsh, unforgiving environment of the Andes, the survivors were finally rescued. The journey of survival, bravery, and unthinkable sacrifices had come to an end. The world was left in awe of their strength, determination, and will to survive against the most extreme odds. Years later, the survivors, now scattered across different parts of the world, still share their story. They have become symbols of resilience, and their experiences have inspired countless individuals facing their own challenges. Their book, Alive, written by Piers Paul Reed, recounts their harrowing tale, and the subsequent film adaptation brought their journey to an even wider audience. However, despite the passage of time, the emotional scars of their experience remain. The survivors often gather together to reflect on the ordeal that bonded them forever. For them, it's not just a story of survival, but also one of sacrifice, brotherhood, and a deeper appreciation for life. They've spoken about how the experience reshaped their perspectives. Many have dedicated themselves to giving back, participating in charity work, and sharing their lessons with others. For these survivors, the Andes was not just a place of tragedy, but also a place of profound reflection on the power of human endurance. The legacy of the Andes flight disaster and the lessons it imparts about the strength of the human spirit lives on. It reminds us that, even in the most dire circumstances, survival is not just about the physical struggle. It's about the mental fortitude, courage, and the connection between people that ultimately see them through.